Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the No Matter What Club. I am so excited to welcome our guest, Sheku. Sheku is a highly motivated professional who is focused on providing in-depth quality care, maintaining direct lines of communication with patients, and he thrives in working collaboratively to provide evidence-based treatment. Sheku has more than 7 years of acute care experience in hospitals, including critical care, nursing, and a level 1 trauma center at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, as well as assisting patients at Cedars-Sinai Medical Group in urgent care. Additionally, Sheku has extensive work and training with patients diagnosed with opioid use disorder, stimulant use disorder, and other major substance use disorders. Sheku obtained his Master's of Science in Nursing as a psychiatric mental health nursing practitioner from Azusa Pacific University and his Bachelor of Science in Nursing from California State University in Los Angeles. Not only is he a great medical provider, but he's also my best friend, and I'm so excited to welcome him to the podcast. Everybody, please welcome Sheku Fofana. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the No Matter What Club. I am honored and privileged to be here with Mell, obviously, our Chemsex specialist, and someone that I'm very excited to have in the studio today is my best Judy, and also a behavioral health nurse practitioner who specializes in addiction, Sheku Fofana.
Hello, hi, thank you so much for having me.
Your skin looks amazing in this
Thank
lighting.
you.
So today we're going to talk about something that's really important to all of us professionally and personally, and no matter what, we specialize in chemsex and sexualized drug use, and I'm really interested in having a really beautiful conversation today about what it is and the medical impact of detoxing and all of the things that go with recovery from crystal meth. And Mel, do you want to explain what chemsex is?
Sure. I mean, chemsex, as defined, and I reserve the term chemsex for men who have sex with men. Anything outside of that is sexualized drug use, just because I want to honor the origins of that, which are in the UK, actually. So chemsex is, it's sexualized drug use. It's the intersection of substance use and what I would say compulsive or impulsive sexual behavior. It spans across all genders, all orientations, but the epidemic is really problematic with gay men in the LGBTQ community. So it's, if it fires together, it wires together. If I'm using substances to facilitate sexual settings ongoing and chronically, then it becomes chemsex, because there's a fusion that happens in the neural pathways in the mind. And so we have to kind of disentangle, I think, those two fusions in recovery, right?
I have a question. How long does it take for that entanglement to happen? Like, how quickly can somebody get stuck in that loop of chemsex when they start using meth?
I mean, that's a really good question, because not every chemsex person is addicted to chemsex, right? Maybe someone just needs to loosen up a little bit, so they have a beer, they smoke a joint, and then they feel a lot more comfortable or lucid to facilitate sex with another person. But with chemsex, the driver it's drug dependent, right? So sex becomes drug dependent. It's no longer operating or functioning, in a sober frame of mind at all. And so we see people that cannot have sex without drugs. And as far as when that starts to fuse together, I mean, meth these days is really potent, really strong. So that type of euphoria, we're looking at, upwards of 1,500% increase in dopamine, which is unlike anything we've ever seen, right? Cocaine is 300%. Smoking a cigarette, you're gonna get 200%. But with that amount of euphoria, that amount of dopamine, and dopamine is also it's a motivator, right? So this is what motivates us towards things. And you pair that with sex 3 times, then you're probably going to have a problem having sober sex, because the euphoria is not going to be the same, and sex will trigger meth will trigger sex, and then, it takes a good 14 months to kind of start to uncouple those things.
We hear a lot that, especially with the apps, people's first sexual experience involves substances. I mean, for me, as a gay man, my sex use and my drug use and my sex life were so intertwined that I similar to what you said, right? Like I can't use without having drugs, and I can't use drugs without having sex, and it really was both of them together. Before I have one more question before. Sorry, editing. Okay. I forgot to go over Sheku's story.
Okay. All right. We can bounce around.
So, Sheku, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes. So I am a family nurse practitioner and a psychiatric nurse practitioner. I'm the medical provider for No Matter What Detox, which has been such an amazing experience because I have lived experience. I'm sober myself. So when I get to see these patients come in, I'm able to level with them because sometimes they don't want to be there. It's their families that are bringing them in. They're there because they don't have a place to stay or whatnot. And I get to be one of the first faces that they see. And when there's a little bit of resistance, sometimes I'm able to say, hey, like, I know where you've been and I've been there myself. And I think there's a little bit more buy-in when the provider has been in where the patient has been. I have a background in urgent care. I was a nurse at Cedars-Sinai during the pandemic.
We were roommates, by the way. So not only is Sheku the provider for No Matter What Detox and an amazing medical provider, but he's also my best friend. I think I said that earlier, but look, who are we?
I know. Remember when we thought
we walked out of our hall together? So our rooms were across from each other when we were roommates, and we had just moved into Sheku had just bought a new condo, and we had just moved in, and like we were watching the news, and it was just like we were trying to figure out what COVID was, and we were both watching the same station at the same time, and there was like this newscast talking about it, and we literally walked out of our bedrooms at the exact same time, and we were like, we're fucked. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like it was a wild experience.
It was, I mean, I was in the middle of it at the medical respiratory ICU in Cedars-Sinai at the beginning of the pandemic. Wow. And we didn't know what was going on. It was really, it was really scary. But it really changed the course of my life and kind of made me realize like what's important in life, like, and that's when I kind of made the move to urgent care and then started working in substance use disorder and mental health.
It's when we opened No Matter What Recovery too. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that, being from New Orleans and going through Hurricane Katrina, whenever I give my share, I always talk about what a blessing Hurricane Katrina was for me, because it got me out of a city where my addiction was just very, very active. And I know that the pandemic was a terrible time for so many people.
Crisis. Yeah.
Similar to that though, it gave us an opportunity to like really rethink what our purpose was in life. And I'm so grateful that like we followed our hearts in a time of uncertainty.
Yeah. And it's really mind-blowing that people got sober during the pandemic.
I hear people with those sober dates like in 2020, and I'm like, wow, you get an extra 10 years 100%. Just for getting
sober. Could you have gotten sober on Zoom?
No,
I
could not. No. So many people did though, and like, wow, what a testament to one's resilience.
100%.
I mean, if like when I got sober, I needed the coffees, I needed the hugs, I needed the community, I needed the accountability, and so my hat is off to anybody that got sober.
I mean, especially if we're like speaking of chemsex addicts, like intimacy and forming those bonds and connections, the relational hugs and like walking into like that is so important in this recovery, is beginning to develop those skills. So I can't imagine what that must have been like for others who didn't have access to that during 2020. But I still see sober days pop up, and I'm really like, wow, go you.
But what can I say other than a bunch of tweakers figuring out how to throw a meeting together and very quickly?
Yeah.
I mean, it was like, it was so wild.
Major meetings that like hundreds of people go to were quickly transferred to Zoom, and still providing a safe space for people. And,
the cool thing is it's like it made LA recovery available to the world.
Yeah, I mean, I've attended meetings like in the UK or like in Thailand, and like just hearing different stories and different ways that meetings are run is really fascinating.
Absolutely.
Well, I love it. So can you tell me a little bit what the detox, well, first of all, normally we see with GHB, and this is very common, with crystal meth, there's usually GHB use or ketamine use. There's other substances that people who use crystal meth in the gay world.
Alcohol is very big. It's like kind of like the underlying, everybody is like, is drinking.
What does the detox process look like?
So for meth, really the main thing is like, I need you to go to sleep. Like I tell my patients, like, some patients have been up for days, even weeks. And so really the big part of my assessment is finding out if like when they've slept, are they hearing voices or seeing things? Because that is huge. Meth psychosis is a big problem. And I don't know how many times I've had a patient like leave because they thought they were unsafe. So a big part of my my assessment is finding out if they've got any psychosis going on, and then getting them medications. I think an antipsychotic or something like a benzodiazepine for the first few days of detox is really important because they need to sleep. So meth itself is going to flood the brain with dopamine, just like you said.
Right.
And if you look at schizophrenia, medications that treat schizophrenia are dopamine blockers. So you have this increase of dopamine in schizophrenia. You have the same thing going on with crystal meth use. So it's no wonder that people are having these delusions, paranoia, thinking that people are out to get them. And then on top of that, you have sleep deprivation. If I don't get at least the amount of sleep that I need, I'm going to start hallucinating. So pair those together, it is a recipe for disaster. So getting them some sleep, getting them medications is like one of the first things that we do.
One of the things when I was living my crystal meth, when I was in my meth ambition era, as my husband has coined, I was able to sleep and eat and go back out, right? And what we're seeing today in the treatment world is that it's just different. The come down is much different than it was when I was getting high. What is that about?
Well, I mean, just to speak to that, drugs have changed drastically, even in the last decade of what we're seeing on the streets, and specifically around meth. I think it was in 2009, 2008 era where the government cracked down and the FDA was like, okay, we're banning Sudafed. You can't be a Smurf and you can't go grab, 30 packets of Sudafed to make homemade meth, right? And that's what we used to see. And that's probably what we always used is biker meth, right? Or, the meth that's made in the desert and the trailers and then distributed by bikers.
We used to call it peanut butter crank.
Yeah, right? It was like speed, it was crank, it was that stuff, that it was all homemade. But what the FDA didn't know is when they blocked the sale of Sudafed, the cartels began manufacturing their own version of meth. And I don't know if you all have ever seen Breaking Bad. They talk about the blue meth and the P2P meth. That is based on a real story.
Oh, wow.
Because the cartels took over production. And so when that started to happen, we went from the peanut butter crank, 30% purity, right? So maybe your dopamine hit was 400, 500 extra. And now we're seeing 100% purity, which just speaks to what you just said. The brain cannot handle that much dopamine happening all at once. So the symptoms and the features are just more drastic and they're more pervasive, especially in ongoing recovery, because of the injury that starts to happen in the brain when you're hitting 100% dopamine.
And the scary thing is the psychosis feels very real to the patient. A delusion is a fixed false belief. There's nothing that I can say to get them to believe me that nobody's following them.
Right.
And sometimes it causes people to do, erratic things and hurt themselves. And so that's why, for the safety of the patient and the staff, we make sure that we get them medications fairly quickly.
I want to say I love that you said that, because I think a lot of treatment providers go with the resistance route on when someone is in psychosis and they're trying to talk them down and tell them that it's not real. No, that experience is
it's
very
very
real.
real.
And so if I'm sitting with someone who I see has active psychosis, I'm going to honor and validate
100%.
the terror and the fear and the panic that goes with their psychosis. I'm not going to go against it.
No.
Like, I'm always like, okay, this is a very real experience. It may not be true, and I may know that, but I definitely want to validate like how scary that can be for an individual.
And just saying that, it gets them to just like, okay, and I'm going to focus on that. I'm going to focus on the fear and the anxiety around these thoughts and like get you to be comfortable and really just get some rest. And, you know, we've had really good success with keeping patients who like are trying to leave, and, you know, because leaving could mean like death.
They're in fight or flight. Yeah. So like getting them grounded and properly medicated, checking in on sleep hygiene, eat a sandwich.
All the things.
Just eat a sandwich, take a nap. Like, it's going to be okay on the other side, but that's hard to do.
Yeah.
When I got sober and somebody said that, like, when you know, to buy a black suit, right? Because it's like, I know it sounds super dramatic to our listeners, but like, we're talking life or death. We're talking Russian roulette with your life every time you pick up and use. And you know, it's just so scary because I'm tired of burying people.
Yeah, me too. And especially like people who struggle with chemsex or, you know, with meth addiction, like a lot of times like those deaths are not reported because they're actually mental health issues that have gone untreated and undiagnosed outside of their use, right? So we've had a lot of people die by suicide versus like overdose. I think I've seen more people die by suicide than I have overdose in working in this field in 10 years that have been meth addicts.
With all of this very heavy talk, though, I do want to talk about, because it's very real.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a very real situation, but I do want to talk about like the beauty of life on the other side, past the initial detoxification process, right? Like for 3 sober individuals here, like, you know, in our previous episode, we were talking about the bumper sticker slogan, like a life beyond our wildest dreams. But like, you know, I mean, getting the pleasure and the honor of working in this field, when the lights start to turn on and our clients or the people that we're working with, it makes all of this worth it.
So I like, one of the last things that I tell patients before they leave, usually around week 2 or 3, is like, that is the best part of my job. Like when they come in, they're like, oh, you know, not making any sense. And I'm like, it's okay. You know, we got you. We're here to walk this journey with you. And by week 2 or 3, I see the lights they're there. You know, their skin is clearing up. They're smiling and they're like, I feel so much better. And really, that is the best part of my job, you know, because we get to put people back on this road to live life, because they have not been living life,
right?
You know, they've been, you know, missing work. They haven't talked to their families. Some of them have been missing. Their family had no idea where they were, and we get to help them like get back to life. You know.
Yeah, I love like talking. Like, I'm a big motivational interviewing because I want to. If we're working with the motivational part of the brain, I want to know, what are you heading towards?
Yeah.
And I've had so many conversations with clients in my office about their hopes and their dreams. And then I see them a year and a half later. I see them 2 years later. And everything that we were talking about that they wanted, they're telling me they have. And like, it just brings me to tears when I see that. I'm like, wow, we were just setting the foundation for this. You were just inviting in the ability to dream again. I think addiction, this is one of the biggest casualties, is it steals your ability to dream about a future, because you're so locked into like that fight or flight and the euphoria and the substance that you forget that you have dreams. And so to see people be able to dream again and then live those dreams, come on.
I couldn't remember the last time I had a belly laugh when I got sober. You know?
Carbonated holiness. That's what I call that. Those big belly laughs. Like, come on. That's what that is.
It's like, you know, when we didn't laugh when we were out there. I mean, if we did,
funny.
For me, it was like this superficial kind of thing. You know, when I tell my story, I always say I was 33% interior designer, 33% sex tweaker, and 33% I distributed drugs. So, and 33% like businessman, you know? And so, but my addiction was wrapped up in painting walls, being promiscuous and then the hustle.
Oh yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But like, it's so funny because it's not funny. It's ironic that we're all sitting here today, like sober people that are actually like doing work in our program and our lives and our careers and all of it. And I love being able to like walk on this path with the two of you. And really work with our community because Mel, I really would love for you to talk about like as gay men, like when people start getting into chemsex, one of the things that I hear you talk about all the time is that meth is a shame killer. Like what happens to that? Like how does shame happen, and what is meth's effect on the shame, and how does that turn into sex and drugs?
Well, I think that starts from an early age, right? Like I identify as a queer person and I learned to hide that really easily. Like, oh, this is over here, look over here, right? So in marginalized communities or people that deal with minority stress, like that shame starts to build up, and it doesn't even matter. Like if you have a safe, supportive, loving family and you come out to them and they're accepting, it doesn't mean that you're not still walking in the world and seeing like homophobic or transphobic or xenophobic or whatever it is. All of those things are still coming towards you. So you absorb them, even if you have like a nuclear chosen family or a family that's supportive, you're still absorbing the climate that's outside of you, right? So that builds up this toxic shame, right? And then people just start to compartmentalize that, right? And this is where I think there's really, especially in adolescence, a split between sex and intimacy, right? And this is where I see people really grab hold of substances because the secrecy is that foundation of secrecy is already set, because maybe I can't, be out in school. I'm not able to take anyone to prom. I don't even know how to tell someone I have a crush on them, or even tell a friend I have a crush on that person.
For me, it was having sex with older men, and I couldn't talk about it.
You begin to hide, right? And so like we already have a foundation of a split life. And I think by the time someone actually finds meth, they come with internalized depression, internalized homonegativity, toxic shame. They're carrying the burdens of all of this. And you find a substance that completely eradicates an emotional consciousness. If I have stigma around sex, if I have shame about being gay, and all of that's gone for a minute, like people are willing literally to pay with their lives to just have them be relieved of that for a moment. So like you don't have access to an emotional compass, a moral compass, a spiritual compass. All of that is cut off. And while it serves an addiction, on the other side of it, it's tenfold, right? Because after I come down, all of that comes back. And then maybe I've gone outside of like my sexual value system while I've been using. And how do I reconcile that on the other side? Like, because it's an identity shift and it's an identity changer, right? And this is where we come to moral injury.
I feel like we see that a lot with body dysmorphia too, with which is very common in our community. I know that I struggle with it. And, I know that it's super common. Like I started using and I saw the weight loss and I thought I looked stunning. And then when I got sober, I started to put on a little weight, and my solution then was to go get high at that point, and I had to find a new solution.
Well, that's actually like the top 5, right, that I hear. Like discomfort in one's body and about one's body is probably one of the top 5 relapse triggers, right? And when a client comes to me and they're like, oh my gosh, this is really hard. Like I'm noticing that I'm gaining weight, and I'm just really like gentle with it, I think, where I'm like, man, you starved your body for days on end for long periods of time. Of course, anything you put into your body is going to be like, it's going to hold on to it as tight as it can, because you've trained your body to not know when it's going to eat again or get nourished again, right? So in the beginning, yes, that's totally normal and that's going to happen. And that's your body just loving on you and trying to keep you alive. And that falls off. But a lot of people don't think it will. So they end up going out.
And then to that point, isn't a side effect of a lot of psych meds. And
it is. Yeah. It is the weight gain. And, like you said, gay men, we have this ideal that we think
gay?
We're I gotta go. We have this ideal that we're trying to attain, and patients feel the same way. What I've been finding lately is a lot more people talking about their disordered eating.
Right.
They're restricting, they're binging. And that's not usually something in my psych visits. I always ask about disordered eating, but now that's something that I'm asking about like week 2 or 3, because, you know, if this person already has these thoughts or sees their body in you know, with a body dysmorphia, that's a risk for relapse,
Right.
you know, if we're not addressing that. And so I think it's medication choice is really important. You know, things like Seroquel and Zyprexa are huge metabolic, cause metabolic disturbances, weight gain, blood sugar to go up. So I will switch medications or, you know, make sure I tell them about these risks. And usually that's when it comes up. They're like, oh, no, I'm not taking that because that's going to make me gain weight.
And I think it's a double-edged sword, right? Where it's like, you know, what's more important in early sobriety? Is it your mental state or the way that you look? And
well, that's what's tricky about meth too. And like to speak to what you were talking about, I call that the rebuild, right? Because people will come in, they'll clean up, they'll detox, they'll be at residential, and then, you know, they mistake exterior wellness for interior wellness. And it's very specific, I've noticed with meth, is like, especially binge purge cycles, because usually it's not common that we see someone that's using every day. It's usually like every week, every 2 weeks, every 30 days. So it's this binge purge cycle, which really mimics like eating disorder behavior, right? And then they come in, they clean up, they gain a little bit of weight, maybe they get a tan, they're feeling good about themselves. Then they go back on the apps because they're masking what's going on the inside with what's appearing on the outside.
for me, and that's what I call like having a huge ego and low self-esteem.
Right.
You know, which is, I think, very common within our community. But for me, like, that's something that I still have to work on a daily basis, even with 9.5 years sober. You know, I mean, it is, we live in LA. You know, I'm from Louisiana. So in Louisiana, I'm a 10, but here I'm a 4, you know?
Right.
And so, but you know, you kind of gotta, when we get sober, we really, for me, I've had to really just kind of focus. Well, first of all, there was no sex for me. Like, sex was just out of the question for me in early sobriety. Apps were completely out of the question. And I really had to work on the mental, physical, and spiritual malady of my substance use. And even though I had put on some weight, and I know this is really cliche for the viewers and listeners who are in the program, but for me, I started feeling sexy when I started doing esteemable acts. And for whatever reason, that helped me be able to get into who I am as a sexual being, but also as a person, because again, like I didn't have my sexual identity was wrapped so infused with crystal meth. I had to figure out who I was as a person.
Well, I think you're speaking of like attraction, right? Yeah. And like attraction has so many different levels. And I think, you know, as a community, we're fed that like sexual attraction is attraction. That's it, right? How you look, how you present, you know, masculinity and femininity, all of those things. What you see is what you get with attraction. But what you're talking about are deeper levels of attraction, right? When I start to feel good about myself, the confidence, and let's just break down confidence. Like, I have a mentor that's like, if you break it down to the Latin roots, it means to be with faith, right? To do things with faith. So confidence, if you're enacting confidence through esteemable acts, that's going to raise the bar on attraction, and you're going to feel a lot more attracted to other people and a lot more attractive because you're feeling good about yourself, and it's not being based on exterior wellness.
Oh my God, that's so deep. I love it.
And to your point, you know, Paul, class of 2015.
Yes.
You know, I still have to work at my recovery every single day.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's one of the big things. Like I came in with internalized racism, internalized homophobia. Yeah. When growing up as a gay kid, it was like no blacks, no fats, no femmes, no Asians.
Oh, especially on the apps.
On the apps.
Oh,
that's and so I had this idea of like what attractive was.
What's acceptable. Yeah.
You know, and so, you know, it was the perfect storm for me to turn to substances to be able to like wash all of that away.
Yeah. Right.
You know, and just breathe.
Right.
You know, and so today I still have to fight against those things that were like put into me as deep rooted.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
I recently shared or spoke at a meeting, and I talked about those things, and 3 people of color gave me their numbers afterwards because they were like, I relate to you.
Right.
Like,
right.
I felt that,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And it's really something that I wish people talked about more. So I'm really, really grateful that you brought that up.
Yeah.
That
The intersectionality. I think we shy away sometimes from talking about things like internalized racism and what does that mean and how does that show up in the community. And for people in recovery, going back to the apps, like you're gonna get the same thing, right?
Yep.
Like, and that to me is heartbreaking because as a community, it's lateral violence.
Yeah.
Like we are being pinned against each other, just based on presentation, an endless sea of torsos that just deplete self-esteem and only exacerbate existing issues around intersectionality and internalized beliefs around oneself. So, I mean, I'm glad you're sharing about it because people need to be talking about it more.
I'm going to get really vulnerable for a second. And, you know, I grew up in the South, right? And I grew up in a family of people that were racist. And so my best friend is a person of color. And I think on multiple occasions, we've had to have conversations about internalized racism and how I looked at that community, and you know, very vulnerable and honest and loving conversations with between the two of us, where I've had to have these conversations and say, I don't understand. And I'll never forget one time that one of the only fights that Sheku and I have ever gotten in was during BLM. And he goes, I need you to support me.
Oh my gosh,
I need you to do, I need you to educate yourself. I need you to read books. I need you to be with me through this. And for me, I just didn't understand how that movement was so challenging for you and the world to navigate, but also just like, I didn't put myself in your shoes. And that conversation really opened up my eyes to like, hey, like, the world, I need to be open to other worldviews, and I'm, you know, as my best friend, like I have people in my life in sobriety today that can sit me down and have those conversations with me and work with me on that stuff. And so you know, it's so crazy that this came up, and thank you.
I mean, so when George Floyd was murdered, okay, I grew up in this town called Chino Hills, very white, Republican, homophobic, and the idea was put in my head that I was different from other Black people. Okay, I had people using the N-word and like, oh, but it's okay, I'm your friend, you know? So in my head, I was like, I haven't experienced certain things, and it was like this moment of like, oh, wait. Yeah. I've been experiencing racism my whole life, right? Microaggressions, and it was like this really wild, like this part of me that I hadn't been willing to look at, internalized racism in sobriety, cracked open.
Of course.
And so I was just going over with my sponsor, like all these different things that have happened, and so you know, we had the conversation, you know, of like, I can't be the one to teach you about the Black experience.
Right.
I'm not the spokesperson. And I need you to read and to like, there's so many books, and it was such a beautiful conversation. And those are the kind of relationships that I get to build in recovery. And I get to look at those things and start to heal from them.
I mean, those are courageous conversations. And like, just to like do a little like queer history, it was Black folks that invited gay folks in 1920s Harlem. That's where drag started, right? That's where we were allowed to be in clubs and be open and have public displays of affection. Black folks took us in. Like, so we have a rich history with the Black community that has just been erased from the history books. Like, nobody really talks about that because that's actually where it started. And Black folks were the ones that actually brought us in. So I think we need to stand and support together because we're all marginalized communities in different ways to different extremes. But like, we have just, the fabric is so woven in with our opposing and connected communities.
Do you feel like that internalized racism or the way that you felt fueled your using?
Oh, 100%.
How so?
So, I mean, going on the apps and getting rejected or oh, I don't like Black people or whatever, it turns into this like, now I need validation. And I will go to any lengths to find it, even if that means that this man who's older and has drugs, it's going to give me the thing that's going to melt all this away. I'm going to do that.
Right. Can I ask you a really like just very candid, vulnerable question?
Yeah.
As a Black man going on the apps, do you feel like a commodity? Do you feel like a novelty?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sometimes. I mean, the term BBC, you know, or people will like, oh, I've never been with a Black guy. Like, do you want to come over? You know what I mean? Things like that.
Which I imagine is very like
it's
hurtful.
Like, is that all I am?
Right.
You know, and I think there is like now this the learning curve, and people are learning that is that's offensive. It's a macro aggression. You know,
right?
But I think part of my journey has been to find that validation from within.
Right.
You know, I think what a lot of us do is like, we throw our self-esteem at people and we hope that they give it back to us.
Right.
And they usually don't.
No.
So we keep doing that, and then we finally go back to that thing, you know?
Right. The quick hit, like
the quick hit.
The older guy with the drugs. And it's just like, I love these. So we throw our self-esteem at people, right? And just expecting that there's a reciprocity in that. And 9 times out of 10, there's not. And like already feeling wounded around rejection, you know, whether it's from family or society, that just like rips that wide open. And then people just go deeper in the trenches to try and like heal that. Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just love this conversation because I feel like at this time in our world, with everything that's happening in the media and politically, and our community we're scared. I think the statistic, I don't know the exact estimation or the exact percentage, but over the last few weeks, the teen get queer suicide hotline has like tripled in calls than it was the previous year. And as I sit here and think about it, right, like the 3 of us are so lucky to be sitting in these chairs.
Yeah.
It's a privilege.
It's a privilege.
100%.
And for the people that don't make it to these chairs because of not being able to have access to even messages similar to ours, or positive things in the media, or sobriety, or again, we're privileged to have the recovery communities that we have here in LA that aren't throughout the country. The queer meetings, the queer resources, the queer services, the queer specialists. You know, I remember one time as a HIV positive person going to a dentist, and he asked me if I was still taking my AZT, and
that's wild.
Wow.
And AZT, if I'm not mistaken, is a drug that was prescribed in like the late 80s
that
and early
like,
90s.
We're going way back.
And
AZT,
so, like, yeah, I'm going to let you
like,
put your hands in my mouth. Like, get the fuck out of here. So, but anyway, you know, I can't imagine, like, we are so privileged to not only be able to have this big sober lives that we have, but also I think a huge reason why we have the lives that we do is because we had the privilege of having access to the services that we have. And that was one of the reasons we wanted to do this podcast, was so that people across the country and around the world can have a little bit of time with 2 people that are people on the podcast, but you 2 that have dedicated your lives to working with this demographic and this population and this community in the life-saving way that you are. And as you 2 are just sitting here talking, I'm moved because it's just the stuff that y'all are doing is so cool. Like
it really is. Like I you know, this is my dream job. I told my boss, I was like, I can do this. I can do this for the rest of my life. Every other job, it was like, oh God, okay, what's my next move?
I remember.
How do I get out of here?
How do I get?
Yeah.
Okay, I've
Yeah.
done the ICU enough. Okay, urgent care. This is, but like, I'm not in a rush to go anywhere.
You found your purpose.
I found my purpose. And are there some days when I'm like, ugh, of course. But what happens is I will have an interaction with a patient that completely turns everything. And I'm like, this is why I do this. You know, and the interesting thing about being sober and working in treatment is like we still have to do our thing.
Own work.
Yeah, we still like over here like adjusting it and like moving through it.
If I'm not right, there's no way I could be there for the patient. So I have to make sure I'm right with myself before I go into work.
Heal the healers.
Right. That's
Absolutely.
right. Yeah. There, and I work a lot in like sexual recovery and like relationships. And let me tell you, and like, the first couple of years, I had to tidy up my side. I was like, oh, I can't be over here preaching like sexual integrity, but then I'm over here breaking hearts. There was like this weaving that started to happen.
Here's Mell.
Yeah. Okay. Like it was like that. But I also learned so much from the people that I work with.
Yeah.
Like I've gone to school and I have all the bells and whistles that go with it. But I think that I've really learned more about my community from deep listening to my community. And like it is in those moments where I'm like, I see someone and I can like hear their pain and I can see their pain and like just walk beside them or just like sit beside them. Like that is one of the most transformative, magical moments I've ever experienced as a human.
Absolutely.
Like just being there and like it is a vocation. Doesn't matter what walls I'm doing this in. Like this is it.
Yeah.
Like yeah.
For me, it's kind of the magic with sponsorship too. I mean, it's that one-on-one time where you get to spend, like I did a lot of my healing and, when I was doing my work in recovery, but like when I started working with another person was really when the dynamics of my sobriety changed.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You got to walk the walk at that point.
Totally.
Yeah.
Oh,
Exactly.
yeah. My sponsee has like, I had to keep going on my step work because he was catching up and I was like, ooh, we got to go.
The fire's lit. Let's go. So say a person is, and I see this a lot, this is why I'm asking the question, like a person is, they detox, they're in residential, they've gone through a treatment program or even gone through the rooms and they're like 6 months sober or 9 months sober. What I have seen is psychosis symptoms come back up. Like I've had people at 9 months sober sleeping in sober livings with like a fire hydrant, like, or a fire extinguisher because they think someone's coming after them again. And they have a lot of shame about those symptoms, like, reappearing in their life. So they don't talk about it. And then they go into states of panic and fear. So I'm curious, like from a medical perspective, what would be a good intervention for someone like that?
So first and foremost with any, like we talked about earlier, acknowledging the feelings behind the belief or the paranoia, the psychosis, and letting them know that that's normal.
Yeah.
I think what we see is so many people don't talk about it because they're like, I don't want anybody to think that I'm high.
Right.
I don't want people to think that I relapse. I don't want people to think that I'm quote unquote crazy. And I would liken it to a flashback from LSD almost. Right. This does happen. And I think reassuring them that they're okay and then finding out what this belief or what the psychosis is about, and then getting them to the proper professional, whether it's a psychiatrist, nurse practitioner. A lot of the times it's very transient and goes away. Sometimes they may need like a short course of like some medication, but I think most importantly is like making them feel safe and like safe enough to share what's going on is really important.
Yeah, that's so digestible, and thank you so much for that because I think about, post-traumatic stress and like flashback being one of the symptoms, and so I think that will be very easy for someone to kind of understand, like, and oftentimes flashbacks aren't here, they're a body and they're felt sensation, so if the flashback is around fear and panic.
Oh, the heart rate's going to go up, the blood pressure, they're going to sweat, they're going to, it's going to trigger that fight or flight.
Right. Which then activates the psychosis.
Absolutely.
Got it. Thank you so much.
So one of the things that we're asking all of our guests is on all the podcasts is, what's your no matter what?
I think my no matter what is like is I cannot be in a relationship with somebody who is using substances. Like even for my, like marijuana is a non-negotiable for me because I feel like it puts people on a different level, and I can't level with you when you're high. And I actually dated someone and we got to a huge fight while he was
on those gummies, honey.
on those gummies.
I mean,
You remember? And so that's my and I've tried to I'm gonna negotiate this, and it's not something that I can do. Alcohol is fine if you have a normal relationship with alcohol, good for you, love that, and we can but I think the hard stop is like substances.
Yeah. And also in intimacy, like when you're kissing someone as a sober person and like you taste the marijuana or whatever, it's just not.
I think for me, it's always like seeing someone intoxicated, like actually triggers me more than seeing like a beer on a table or a joint or whatever it is. But like seeing the looseness, like I'm going to say this, like I have a part that's like jealous and gets mad. Like I want to feel like that. Like I want to be like that. Like,
even with time.
So, like almost 9 years, right? And I still like when I see people inebriated or under the influence, there's that little thing that comes up that's like,
we were at we were going to go to the Panté just to see a show, and so we went to this dinner, and it took us 30 minutes to get our table, and the food took forever. And this table next to us this lady had ordered this martini or something, and I watched the martini the entire time. And we got up from the table. She got up before us to leave, and she left with half of her drink in the glass, and one drink. And I was like, I'm like, normal people that are not addicts or alcoholics don't sit there and like watch how much
somebody else's martini.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Watching somebody else, you're like, am I drinking too fast? Okay,
Right.
wait, I need to slow,
Yeah.
Well, I really, really enjoyed my time with the two of you today, and I'm so grateful that I get to do this with y'all every day, and we get to serve the clients that we serve, and I get to do it with people that I call friends, and that I am honored and privileged. I love what we do, and I love working with y'all. So thank y'all for coming on.
Thank you
so much for having us.
Thank you, Paulo.